hate to involve people. It's going well. But I got paid for this. So, in this week's Parsha, we have Parsha starts out in a kind of with a kind of strange topic. At least the placement is strange. Parsha starts out with halachas of wartime. You go out to war, right, and you see your fast Torah. So then there's a procedure how to take your fast Torah as your wife, right? So the problem with this is, right, that in last week's Parsha we also had halachas of wartime. We had all sorts of halachas when you surround a city, right? So then you can't chop down the fruit trees. You have to send an offer to make peace with them before you fight. And the Gemara, the Chumash finishes up over there with all the halachas of wartime, and it goes on to the halachas of Eglah Rufa. Goes on to the halachas of a person who's walking along this in the wilderness and he finds a dead body, he finds somebody who's murdered, right? So there's a whole procedure how to get kapara for the fact that someone was murdered under the watch of the Zikni Yair, at the time when people could have maybe done something to save this person. So there's a whole procedure. Then we start with this week's Parsha and we get into the halachas of wartime again. So I saw brought in the Sefer that the Maggid Meshurim of Vilna, Yaakov Yosef from Vilna, asked the question. He wanted to know, right, why does the Torah set it up this way, right? Why do we start with the halachas of wartime, finish up with the halachas of wartime, go on to the halacha of Eglah Rufa, and then restart the halachas of war in this week's parsha? Why didn't the Torah just continue and put them all in and want to organize it? Want to be organized? Because Baruch is probably an organized. He runs things pretty organized in this world, right? His Torah is an organized Torah. Why do you have such a disorganized mess over here? So he said the following to answer this. He said that the answer is because when a person goes out to war is a necessary thing. Right? It's we know from Surat Tanakh, sometimes Klal Yisrael had to go to fight. Sometimes it was Mechemes Mitzvah, sometimes it was Mechemes Rishus, right? But there was a necessity for war. So the Torah licenses war. Right? Of course, we know when Mashiach comes, we're waiting for that time. But Ba'asher Usham, before Mashiach comes, we don't have much choice. We're going to have wars in this world, and Klal Yisrael inevitably is going to be part of those wars. So, and that's okay. It's okay. So you have to go out to war. You're going to have to kill people. But it's possible that when you go out to war and you go kill people, you're going to become a hardened person, right? One of these things that armies work on when people go into the military, one of the difficulties that militaries have with new recruits is training the person not just to aim the rifle and shoot the target, but actually to not just be able to shoot the target, but shoot a person. It's a whole different hergish, right? To actually shoot a person. It's many, for many, hopefully for many people, it's counter what they would want to do. It's not in their chromosomes. They wouldn't want to kill another human being. But you got to war and you become a professional soldier, so you soon learn how to do that, and you become hardened to it. So it could be that you could become hardened to human life. You could say, listen, so somebody dies, big deal. People die all the time. Oh, so what? Right? So in the middle of the halachos of war, the Torah inserts the halacha of Eglah Rufa. Because the Torah wants to tell you, think about this for a second. You think human life is so cheap? You're walking along and you find somebody on the ground and he was murdered. You can't just shrug your shoulders and say, people die. I already killed 5 people in war last week, big deal. Right? No, you have to bring Eglah Rufa. You have to have a kapara. Somebody died over here. You have to be margish what it means that a human life was taken. So in the middle of war, the halachas of war, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sticks in Eglah Rufa over there so that we'll understand that yes, war is a reality, but don't let it make you into a different type of person. Don't let it erode your rachmanos, right? You have to still be machshav human life. That's why Eglah Rufa is inserted over there. I remember my father had a great uncle. I never met him actually, but he was in the American Army during the World War II. And his job was, they would parachute him in behind enemy lines, and he would act as a professional terrorist. He would go around and kill civilians, just for the sake of spreading terror among whoever it was, the Germans, whoever it was. So, okay, fine. When he got back from the war was over, he survived, he came out from the war, so he had a very hard time settling down in society. Because when you're used to going around and being a cowboy, doing things your way, right? However you want. You're a terrorist. You kill people. You do things. There's no rules for you. You can do anything you want. So now you come back to society. So one day he was going to go park his car at some mall somewhere, and somebody else cut him off and took the parking space. So he got out and beat the guy up. So he was arrested, and they brought him in front of the judge, and the judge stopped. This is before the days of all these post-traumatic stress and the awareness of that. But the judge stopped the problem over here, and he sent him instead of to jail, but to therapy. He said, "You need help, right? You need help because your war has changed you. War has made you into a person that isn't a person anymore. It's made you into something that you're not supposed to be, and you have to go back and you have to find out how to be a civilized human being again." So that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts in over here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu inserts into the Chumash over here. He tells us that war is a reality, but you can't make war change you. You can't allow war to change your perception of human life. That's why we have Egla Rufo in the Torah. So I think that this is just a haschala to the rest of the Parsha. The rest of the Parsha sets the tone for the whole Parsha of how Klal Yisrael perceives what Milchama is. It's a fascinating thing. You have a pasuk later in the Parsha. Parsha says, when you go out to war against your enemy, right? You have to be careful from kol davar ra. You have to be careful not to do any averos. So why do you have to be careful? Why does a person have to be careful when he goes out to war? You have to be careful not to do averos every day, right? Why when you go out to war specifically? So the Netziv writes that if he goes through the Vershim, he says it's really not his own chiddush. He just says if you malak it in the Rishonim, you'll see that there's 3 reasons why you have to be careful when you go out to war not to do averos. Number 1, it's a shas takana, right? You're holding in a dangerous spot, right? War is a dangerous place. When there's an hour of danger, so a person has to be on his best behavior because the Satan could easily be mekatreg. The Satan could come along and then find lots of if you do any avera that could be held against you and that could end your life. You're in a matzav sakana. You got to be very careful. Another answer: why you have to be on your best behavior? Because the pasuk tells us in this week's parsha that when you go out to war, Hashem is there. Hashem is with you. You want Him with you. Right? You don't think you're going to win this one on your own. Hashem is there. So if you're in the king's palace, you better be on your best behavior. Right? When you're home, you should be on your best behavior also. But okay, you slip. But when you're in front of the king, you can't slip. But there's a third reason, and this he quotes from the Ramban. And he says the Ramban writes, it's in this week's parsha. The Ramban writes because when you go out to war, that's a makom, right? That naturally hate is matzui in it. It's a situation where naturally a person is prone to find hate. He's prone to find averos. And that's where the Torah comes along and it says, of course you have to be v'nishmartem mikol davar ra all year round. But when you got to war, be doubly careful. What does that mean? So Ramban explains, and it's something we know, it's a phenomenon we know, right? Who are some of the most immoral, right, and inappropriately behaving people? Soldiers, right? Even if they're fighting for us, or whatever us is, fighting for whatever cause we believe in, but soldiers that go out to war tend to have very loose morals, right? This is a W, right? It's a focus. The American military, which is more civilized than many other places, right, has focused on this a lot to try to figure out ways to keep soldiers from immoral excesses when they go out to war, right? But the other countries couldn't care less, right? It was a W when Russia. At the end of World War II, when they took over Berlin, right? So the Russian army, the Russian soldiers had absolutely, they went around and they stole, they robbed, they were ma'anis any woman they found, right? They killed people. It was a nebuch because they had people who were Holocaust survivors who had survived the camps only to be killed by the Russian soldiers, right? Because the Russians, if they found some jewelry on you and they wanted it, they killed you and took it, right? And if they found a woman, they took her. Right? They had zero, and that was Bichlal. I read in one book one time. So somebody asked an officer one time, could you bring your soldiers in? He said, listen, they're in the battlefield already for months already. You got to let them have a break, right? That's the break. So Dr. Ramban, the battlefield is a place where hate is matzah. So that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you, "V'nishmartem mikol davar ra." You have to be very careful. What does it mean when v'nishmartem mikol davar ra? What do you have to be careful about? So some things are obvious, but some things are not. It says in the Sifrei, you have to be careful of avodah zarah. Okay, I understand that. It shouldn't be nikshal and avodah zarah. Hashem is with you, fine. You have to be careful, says the Sifrei, in Isser Ervo. It's not acceptable by a Jewish army to go into a place and mim'anis any woman you find. Take any woman you want. And we know at the beginning of the Parsha you have the regulations for your fast horse. You find a woman you want, but there's a whole process how you take her. You can't just take a woman off the street. It's not the Russian army over here. Gezel. It's up to Sifrei. All these things are learned out from Psukim, and Shma'at and Mikol Davaro. An army comes into place, they have no right to be goes, those things are not theirs. You can't just loot a country. You can't just take anything you want from anybody you want to take. Lashon Hara. Nishmar to be called Davaro. The Sifrei Darshan is Davar. Davar means Dibur, right? The army has to be very careful not to have Lashon Hara among them. Why? The Ramban is Masbir because you want to build Achdus among the troops, right? You want to build Achdus among the troops. No Lashon Hara. You can't talk Lashon Hara between yourselves. The Baal Turim writes, right? Nishmar to be called Davaro. Davar means Dibur. No Nivul Peh. Did you ever meet a soldier who doesn't curse? Right? In a Jewish army, soldiers don't curse. They don't curse. They don't steal. They're careful about Isuri Ervo. They don't speak Lashon Hara. What kind of army do you have over here? You know what kind of army you have? You have an army of Kolo guys. That's basically what you have. You think about it, right? You know, you're talking like you took all the first David Kolo and you said, okay, guys, go to it. Okay, that's what you're talking about over here. That's what the Chumash is telling us. Right, and you couple that with what we said over from the Magid Misharim of Vilna in the first pasuk of the Parsha of the Teiztei, right? They're going out to war with all the morals of a kol person, right? And when they kill someone, they're only killing because that's what they need to do, but it's with an appreciation for human life. So that's a very different concept of what war is. Right, very different from what we know today in armies that are out there. Right, the average person who goes to the army today goes into the military today. So what type of person is he? A big, strong guy, right? Probably he got into trouble in a few places in school. That's why they sent him to the military to begin with. That's one of the things you do. You send the guy, you're having a little trouble behaving yourself, right? My parents told me that when they were in Eretz Yisrael, right? So my parents lived in Eretz Yisrael for about 9 years. So they said they're downstairs neighbor with some guy, Chiloni, and he got into a bar brawl. He went into some bar and he got into a big fight and beat everybody up. So the police arrested him. They said, okay, your problem is, I think he was Russian, so he wasn't really Israeli. So they told him your problem is you're not in the army. You go to the army, we won't send you to jail. So they sent him to the army instead of jail, right? In other words. Right, even the great Israeli army, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help them do what they need to do. But at the same time, right, if Mashiach was here, okay, there wouldn't be wars. But if we were self-governing the way we should be, and the prime minister of the country was Chaim Kanievsky instead of the person who's there now, right? So the people who would be in the army would be the Kol guys, because that's the people who you want fighting for you. You don't want some guy who got into a bar brawl fighting for you. You want, right? That's not who you want. You want the Kol people fighting for you. That's a very different conception of what war is and what an army is. So I have a question. Here's my question, right? How's it going to work, right? Let's say that's true. Let's say we had our way, right? And Bennett and Lapid did tshuva, resigned, and let the Rosh Yeshivas take over the country, right? So now the Rosh Yeshivas send the appropriate people to the army who will know how to be in Shmar to Mikol Davaro, who will do it properly. Okay, Baruch HaShem. Now I have no doubt we can win the wars that way, right? It's gonna work fine mitzad that, right? Mitzad that it'll work fine, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaShem holech b'kerev machanecha, right? So that's the Haftarah in this week's Parsha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help you win the war. But my question is, right? Are the Kolo guys up for it? Are they ready to go out there and go fight a war, right? I mean, I don't know. Usually who shoots a gun and kills people? That's the guy who got in the bar brawl. He shoots the gun and kills people. Kolo guy, he has a gun. He's gonna shoot. He's gonna shoot people. He's ready for that. He's gonna do that. It's a pasnisht. So it brings to mind the end of this week's parsha. What does the parsha tell us? The last mitzvah in the parsha is Zochar Isa Shavasa L'cha Amalek. Right? He had a whole parsha that deals with halachas of wartime. So the pasuk at the end of the parsha tells me that the ultimate war is a Amalek. Right? That don't think that there's no mitzvah to kill people, go out and have wars. Of course you have to have wars. Right? If today the Rosh Yeshivas took over the country and they found out who Amalek was, they'd send the army to kill out Amalek. That would be your job. How's that work? So Bisman Shol HaMelech, right? We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to go kill Amalek. And he fails. He doesn't kill Amalek. He leaves Agag alive, and Agag is put in prison. Comes Shmuel Hanavi, and he says to Shmuel says to him, you made a mistake. You were supposed to kill Agag. So at the end, he gives Shaul a lot of mussar, and he tells Shaul, you lost the malchus. Fine, very nice. But at the end, Shmuel says, bring me Agag. So they bring Agag in front of Shmuel, and Agag is in chains. And the pasuk says that when Agag saw Shmuel, he said, "Ochein sar mar hamavis." Behold, the pain, the bitterness of death has been removed. What does it mean? What did he mean by that? So all the Mefarshim give different taiches. What did it mean? What was it? And it was recorded in the Torah for us to know, right? So it can't be just a random comment. Random comments that were made by Agag are not. It's the only comment that's put down from Agag. So what did he mean when he said "Ochein sar mar hamavis"? So Rabbi writes over there. You know what it meant? It meant like this. When Agag was brought in front of Shmuel Hanavi, what did he see in front of him? He see a big soldier in front of him? He saw a Rosh Hashiva. Shmuel Hanavi looked like a Rosh Hashiva. He's standing there with a long white beard, and he has a longer reckle, right? And he comes in front of Shmuel, and Agag said, "Oh, I was worried I was going to be killed. Ochein sar mar hamavis. Don't worry, now Baruch Hashem, I'm good to go. It's this guy with the long white beard isn't going to kill me." And Shmuel says to him, "Kasher shikla minoshim charbecha," the same way you killed other people, you're also going to be killed. Your mother will also be deprived of you. And he says, if you think you're right that I'm not going to kill you, you are so wrong. And he takes a sword, and the Navi tells us that he not just killed him, but he chopped him in half. Right? So, the Navi makes a point of it, right? Shasif, right? He chops him in half. It says he cleaved him in half, straight down. Right? So what's the Pshat? What's the Navi trying to say? The answer is, what the Navi is trying to say is that the way it's going to work, how is it possible that you have an army of an Ishmartim Mikol Davaro? How do you have such people? The answer is that part of being of an Ishmartim Mikol Davaro person, part of being a person who's Oved HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is understanding that morals and what's right and what's wrong and what's pasnished and what is fine is not dictated by our own internal sense of what should be. It's dictated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you that the right thing to do is take a sword and run somebody through, that's the right thing to do, right? And that's not an easy thing to sell in today's world. It was never an easy thing to sell, right? Because as people, as human beings, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us das. He put us on this world, and He gave us das. So part of what we use our das for is to try to determine what's right and what's wrong. And often our own das does not match up with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu's das. And that was Gufa, the Chaim Shmulevitz says, that was Gufa Shaul HaMelech's problem. Shaul HaMelech failed to kill Amalek because Shaul HaMelech says by Shaul HaMelech, Vayorev Banochal. He went down and he fought with Amalek Banochal. And the Gemara Yuma tells us, what does he mean? He fought in the Nachal with Amalek? Al Iske Nachal. He thought about last week's Parsha by Egla Rufa. He thought about what we started with today when we started talking. He thought about the mitzvah of Egla Rufa. And Shaul HaMelech said to himself, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so chos, he's so worried about one nefesh in Klal Yisrael, ad kedei kach, that if one nefesh dies, he has Egla Rufa brought, then how could HaKadosh Baruch Hu want me to go kill out a whole nation? How could it be? It doesn't make any sense. So he had all sorts of tirutzim to himself and all sorts of reasons why he shouldn't kill out all of Amalek. It couldn't be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to kill. And Shmuel Hanavi says to him, it doesn't work that way. Morals and what's right and what's wrong is not what you think it is. It's not what makes sense to you. It's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Timche Zeich Amalek, then you take a sword and you chop Agag in half. And that's what you do. And that's what a Rosh Hashiva would do with a long white beard. That's what the Navi is trying to tell us. And it wasn't easy for Shaul to understand, and it certainly hasn't gotten easier over time. We know that's true, right? In today's world, you have the world as a whole, right? And less from the world is, the more so it's so, right? People, there's a natural human tendency to want to do the right thing. Most people do want to do the right thing. But what's called a right? So if you don't have Torah and you don't have anyone guiding you, so what's right is what I think is right. So to go out there, tell someone in the world today that if we found an Amaleki, we would kill him. Ooh, it's not nice, right? Doesn't sound good, right? I remember I had one. I was once somewhere for Pesach Seder. I was a guest there, and there was another guest there. She was a secular woman, not at all from, and she liked the concept of Pesach Seder very much. It spoke to her. It was Jewish culture and everything like that. And then she was okay until we got up to, I think it was Dayenu. We got into the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was born as Beis Bechira, and we hope that one day we'll go back there to Yisrael and we'll rebuild the Beis Hamikdash and we'll restore Dinei Torah. And she said, whoa, stop. She said, you mean to say that you guys are serious about this thing about establishing a fully religious government in Israel and everybody has to follow religion? Yeah, that's why we're here tonight. Right? and it was like her illusions of the greatness of the Pesach Seder all of a sudden, right, went down the tubes long before we hit the mirror. It was like an eye opener to her, because in her mind she argued the point: freedom of religion, right? So the answer is freedom of religion is fine when you don't know what's right and what's wrong, when you don't know which one is the right religion. But when you do know, right? So then what's right and what's wrong is not dictated by me, it's dictated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that something is also, it's also. If he says Shmir Shabbos is mandatory, it's mandatory, right? That is the struggle that exists today, and it always existed. It goes back to Sholem Melech. It's not a new problem, right? But it's the test, what Chaim Shulevitz says, of what's a real Eved Hashem. A real Eved Hashem is not a person who does the mitzvahs. It's a person who has embedded in his entire fiber, right, of every part of him, that what is right and what is wrong is dependent on the Torah. It's dependent on the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not dependent on my own internal hagation, my own internal judgment. I once saw a story somewhere. I don't know if it's true. I don't like to say all the stories I read because unless I know the truth. But the story, whether it's true or not, speaks to the Indian, right? So I read somewhere. Someone told me. I don't remember the whole thing. But I had a terrible ma'aseh, right? He had a story in which he lost a child, right? The child was sick in the hospital and then died suddenly. So the hospital staff wanted to do an autopsy. So of course we don't permit autopsies in halacha. So one of the doctors called the parents in and explained to the parents, you don't understand, right? You don't understand. If we do this autopsy, we can figure out what went wrong exactly with your child, and we can save other people from having the same pain that you're having, right? That speaks to someone's emotions, right? You are in pain. Don't you want other parents to be saved the same pain, right? So the father answered very well to the doctor. The father said to the doctor, you're playing with my emotions, but you don't understand something. He says, I follow halacha. And if halacha dictated on the day my child died, I had to jump up on your desk and sing and dance, and that's what I would do. So if halacha dictates that no autopsy is to be done, then no autopsy will be done. It doesn't matter if it makes sense to you or doesn't make sense to you. That's what an Eved Hashem is. When a person, when Klal Yisrael goes out to war, v'nishmarta mikol davaro, what does v'nishmarta mikol davaro mean? V'nishmarta mikol davaro means that you understand that I'm killing today, I'm going to kill people at war, but the only reason I'm killing people at war is because that's what it says in the Torah. It's not because human life is cheap. That I know is not true. It's not because I like to kill people. I simply don't like to kill people. I'm doing this because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu said so. So that's a big avoda. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to embed into yourself. It's a challenge, and you'll find it in plenty of places in life. Right? The challenge to embed it into yourself the netiyah to sideline your judgment and your ideas and put forth the Torah's judgment. It's confusing because it's hard to know. It's taka hard to know what to do, right? This woman who I was at the Seder with, she wasn't a bad person. She had no idea, right? There was no reason for her to know that halacha dictates everything and that taka Shmir Shabbos is mandatory for everyone. And there's no freedom of religion on that point, right? That was the only way you can know that is if you have the Torah guiding you, and if you recognize that importance in Torah. I want to say something else, and you'll forgive me for editorializing. This is just personal editorial. The same problem exists in in yeshivas. The same problem exists with particularly Bochrim as they progress in their own frumkeit and their own learning. It's confusing to know what's right and what's wrong, right? You can have situations come up in here and other yeshivas as well, any yeshiva probably, where what you assume to be correct isn't necessarily correct. I'll give you a mashal, right? It's not a mashal that has happened yet, okay? But let's say it would, right? Let's say you would have someone who decides one day that I think that I'm going to take on the great inyan of tikkun chatzos. I'm going to say tikkun chatzos every day. So every day I'm going to wake up at the times of the year where it's appropriate. I'm going to get up at midnight, and I'm going to say the appropriate tikkun chatzos, and I'm going to stay up half the night, being misabel al churban, and then I'm going to go to sleep again and get up for seder. So, is that right or is that wrong? So one of the things you could say, well, of course it's right. It's found in Shulchan Aruch. Look in Siman Aleph. It's right there, right? The other thing that you might say to yourself, if you're thinking a little bit out of the box, is, well, nobody else is doing it, right? So even though it's found in Shulchan Aruch, I wonder if there's a reason for that. I wonder if there's a reason why it's found in Shulchan Aruch, but yet I'm not doing it. So now let's say a Rebbe of yours would find out that you're doing tikkun chatzos, and would come to you and say, I don't think it's a good idea that you should do tikkun chatzos. So one reaction you might have is to say, oh, this Rebbe, obviously he didn't read Shulchan Aruch. Or if he read Shulchan Aruch, he must be just jealous of me because I'm doing this chumrah and he doesn't seem capable of doing it, right? He might have a problem with himself. Maybe he's just, I don't know, maybe he's just trying to do it for the benefit of the yeshiva, make sure guys wake up in time, but really this is the right thing to do. That might be one reaction. Another reaction you might take, and if you thought a little bit out of the box again, was maybe to say that because he has been around the block a little bit, if he doesn't know any more Torah than I do, at least maybe he's a little older than I am, and he might realize that there's a reason why no one else does it, which is whatever it is that the minhag today has evolved that people don't do it because it's too much of a shter to Avodas HaKadosh Baruch Hu during the day, right? That could be a suitable reason why it's become the minhag not to do tikkun chatzos with the native. And at that point, you might, if you were thinking out of the box a little bit, say to yourself that okay, so then the direction that I have to take would be dictated by what I'm being advised by someone who is also an Oved HaKadosh Baruch Hu and has been doing it a little longer, even if he's not any smarter than me. Right? That's an avoda people have, because part of your cheshek to do the right thing, and everyone has that cheshek to do the right thing, is that sometimes we want to do the right thing, but we're not sure what is the right thing. And what dictates what is the right thing is the Torah, of course, and the Torah as interpreted by people who teach it and are more aware of it than you are. And that's an avoda. Sometimes not just to do the right thing, but to rein yourself in from what you thought was the right thing, but isn't really the right thing. And that's something to think about. Because generally speaking, your Rebbe doesn't really care whether you do tikkun chatzos or not. It doesn't have any personal ideas to him. He's pretty comfortable in his bed, right? If somebody here would tell me he's doing tikkun chatzos, I would not feel bad that I'm not. I'm pretty comfortable with my decision not to, right? I'm okay with that. It wouldn't be from a vested interest that the Rebbe is telling you that. It's just something that makes sense that to him, and in his quest to guide you in your avodas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? He is recommending to you what makes sense for your sake, right? That you should understand what is the right thing. It is not a vested interest that he has to somehow stunt your avodas Hashem so you remain behind him, or so it's better for the yeshiva, or whatever other ideas you might have. Pasuk in Shir Shirim says, right, in the beginning of Perek Daled, right, Kadosh Baruch Hu praises all the different attributes of Klal Yisrael, and the mashal over there is the different parts of a person's body. So Kadosh Baruch Hu describes our teeth. Shinayach ke'eder aktuvo she'olu min arachza. Right, Kadosh Baruch Hu says that your teeth are as beautiful as white sheep that come up from being washed. Right? Funny mashal. What does it refer to? So all the Mefarshim write, it refers to the soldiers of Klal Yisrael. The soldiers of Klal Yisrael who fight for Klal Yisrael, the people who go out to war, are different types of people than anybody else is out there. different types of soldiers that exist in the whole world. These are people who are v'nishmar mikol davar. These are people who have in mind to do the right thing wherever they are, and they keep it with them wherever they are, and they know what the right thing is based on the guidance of the Torah. That is the shevach that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says about us. That in this world, what our biggest shevach is that wherever we are, whatever we do, we're always guided by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his ratzon, and we know what his ratzon is based on the Torah. Hashkir Hashem.